All right, it's going live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Barrel Aged Branding. We have a great panelist lined up for you this evening. I am Vanessa. I'm the AIGA president of Toledo. I'd like to give a special thank you to our sponsors for this event this evening. I'd also like to give a special thank you to our sponsors, Millcraft, for sponsoring this event. We really couldn't have done this without you guys, so we really appreciate the support. I'm also going to hand it off to Jill Nicol Antonio from Millcraft. She'd like to give a couple opening remarks for the event.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to tell you how excited we are at Millcraft to be a part of Midwest Design Week. For those of you not familiar with Millcraft paper, we're in our 100th year, which seems unreal. And, you know, like we're just starting all at once because we are, well, many of you probably know us for paper, and really we got started doing stationery and wedding invitations 100 years ago. We do so much more than paper, which is why I'm particularly excited about the panel discussion tonight. So we, in addition to paper and serving the graphic arts and commercial print communities, we have also ventured into some newer markets in the last few years that you may not be familiar with, one of which is craft spirits and beverages. So we've recently acquired Ideal Canning in Indianapolis. We've got a mobile canning unit. We are providing, let's call it single source packaging solutions, as in carton carriers, the PackTech handles for craft beer, shrink film, and certainly the materials for POP and signage, as well as cans and craft cocktails. And really, it's for distilleries and breweries. So we're really excited to be a part of this. Can't wait to hear what everybody on the panel is going to share in terms of some of the amazing branding that you all have done. And I just wanted to give a shout out to our Louisville, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Toledo locations, letting you guys know if you haven't been to a Millcraft location, you definitely want to check us out. And as a perk for tonight, I don't know if you can see behind me over my shoulder, we are giving away these limited edition posters by CSA Design. They're French paper posters. We will be sharing details in Thursday's Slack channel, as well as in a follow-up email afterwards. So keep your eyes open for how to score one of those. And with that, I just wanted to say thanks, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the good stuff tonight.
Thank you, Jill. And thank you for sponsoring this event. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim Zimmer, who will be moderating the panel this evening.
Hey everybody, I'm Jim Zimmer from Zimmer Design in Louisville, Kentucky. And tonight we're going to be talking to all these fantastic spirits designers and also, I believe, some distillers as well. So why don't we go around, I'll give everybody a cue, they'll introduce themselves and also tell everyone what their favorite cocktail is. So we'll start with David.
Oh, hey guys. David Volker. I'm a senior creative director at LPK in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'll keep it short and sweet. So, I mean, my favorite cocktail really is, it's a nice single barrel bourbon, neat, because I have two small children, and quickness is really my preferred level of consumption. So I don't have time to mix a fancy cocktail. So I'm a purist.
Yes. Dak?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dak Austin. I lead the design team at Rabbit Hole Distillery in Louisville, Kentucky. My favorite cocktail, I actually made two tonight to have. I'm an old-fashioned person. As the goes, and the first one I made was with our product High Gold, which is a Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey with a high rye content. And then the second, which I think is much more novel, is I made it with our barrel finished gin. So we have a barrel aged gin, and I made an old fashioned with it. It's called our Rabbit Hole Bespoke Gin.
Very nice. Laura?
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Crahan. I'm the Creative Services Manager at Heaven Hill Brands. And my favorite cocktail that I'm enjoying this evening is called the Gold Rush. It can be made with either Elijah Craig's small batch, really any bourbon, or Larceny, which happens to be my favorite bourbon. It's a wheated bourbon, as well as Domaine de Canton, which is a French ginger liqueur that we produce, and then also fresh lemon juice. So quick and easy and delicious. Cheers.
Nice. Derek?
Howdy. Derek Hulsey. I'm an art director at Young and Laramore in Indianapolis. Should go ahead and confess I'm not the biggest spirits drinker, but when I do, I usually go for an old fashioned or something funky with a bourbon in it.
Austin?
I'm Austin Dunbar of Durham here in Covington, Kentucky. And my favorite, kind of like David, is neat, but I'm neat in the winter and rocks in the summer. You just get too hot. So right now it's a transition. So I'm neating E.H. Taylor right now, which I've been in a Taylor kick too the past couple of months.
Jay?
I am Jay Erisman. I'm the co-founder of New Riff Distilling here in Newport, Kentucky. And my father would probably disown me if I said any other cocktail was my favorite than a martini, which I was raised on, in a manner of speaking, and I still adore today. David, I hear you on the need for speed. I have one small child. Well, he's 7 now, but I just got back to have enough time in my life where I can put the garnish in the drink. You know?
I can't wait for that.
That was you'll get there, brother. It's a big
Someday
step to get back to just an orange peel in the old fashioned. But martini's probably my favorite cocktail.
Jay, I had to ask you, are you actually standing in front of the distillery? Or is that a background?
You know, it is nighttime actually up here. Jim, no, that's a background.
Okay.
Believe me, you don't want to see my home office. So.
All right, Zach.
Hi, Zach Stewart. I'm design director at Doe Anderson in Louisville, Kentucky. And I think my favorite cocktail is a Maker's 46 Manhattan, but tonight I'm keeping it simple and doing Maker's Mark on the rocks.
Very nice. All right, thank you everyone for the introductions. I'm also going to introduce the woman on the blue background up in the corner. That's Kaborski. She's doing the sign language interpretation for the hearing impaired. So thank you for joining us on this panel discussion, and thanks to everyone in the audience. I will get things kicked off with, let's see. Let's go with a softball here. What was your very first distillery project? And I'll start with Austin.
The very first one actually was I was in 2013, and I was in a meeting actually doing a brewery, and just finished wrapping up for some stuff with Sazerac, and it actually ended up being Wild Fireball whiskey. And the gentleman across the table from me, I didn't know who he was, he didn't know who I was, and I was rambling about how horrible I think Fireball whiskey was, because I'm not the target, right? And the guy said, I'm the one who made that. And I come from Canada every 2 weeks. And so that was kind of a funny little thing that ended up happening. But that was the first project I was working on, a bunch of Fireball POS stuff 7-8 years ago.
Okay. How about you, Derek?
Actually, Hotel Tango was my first and to date only distillery project. Done some beer brands and some other consumer packaging and stuff like that. But Hotel Tango's been it so far, and put everything I had into that one. So, but we're hoping to get more of that kind of work, and we really used Hotel Tango to, again, put everything into it and try to get get into the space a little bit more. And it was a blast.
Yeah. How about you, Laura? You're coming at this from a slightly different angle.
I'm not sure I remember my first distillery project. I've been with Heaven Hill for about 6 years now. But I know like one of the things that stands out to me the most is when I came on board, we were actually in the midst of coming up with a new logo for the company, for Heaven Hill Distilleries to change to Heaven Hill Brands to be more representative of all the spirits that we produce. And so that was just a project that stands out to me. And kind of from there, my team worked on the Heaven Hill Distillery logo that now represents our whiskey portfolio. So that's the first project that comes to mind for me, I guess.
Okay. Jay, what about you?
Well, I guess formally speaking, our first project, of course, was this one behind me, this picture, which we opened New Riff in 2014 spring. And I didn't have a distillery before then. You know, I had interacted because we were retailers. We worked at the Party Source in Bellevue, Kentucky, and thus got a chance to work very closely with a great many of Kentucky's bourbon distilleries in a very intimate way, and sometimes launch projects. And there was an occasion back in 2009 when I started doing some experimental barrels for the store in conjunction with one of Kentucky's very famous distilleries and so on. And that was probably the first exposure to asking myself the question of, all right, we made this idea for the store. What do we call it? What is the name of it? And even just trying to come up with a catchy name, that was the first time I had to brush up against, oh, you better get this name right or it could sound dumb. And then, of course, when we went into New Riff, it was years of design, the logo in the very early going, of course, the building, and at the last, almost starting in really 2017 with LPK, was designing the whole package.
Right on. Dak, do you have any insight based on what you've heard from everyone else?
Yeah. I'll just start with when I began at Rabbit Hole. I came on during a time period where we were looking at our portfolio of core products. And what we were trying to do was each one of our products was basically Rabbit Hole Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, Rabbit Hole Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey. And what we decided to do was give our 4 core products proper names. So I was part of the process at the beginning of trying to name these products and figuring out a system in which we would name these. And what we came up with was the idea where all of these names are connected to Louisville, and they're all connected to our founder Cave as well in some way. So that was sort of the beginning of everything. And then from there, we made adjustments to our labels, and then we went from there.
Right on. And David?
Yeah, Jay mentioned the date 2017. We started working with New Riff. If I rewind maybe a decade before that, about 2007, we as LPK started working with Beam Global. The first assignment I can remember was Jim Beam Black, and making that a little bit more of a premium offering for the consumer. And we had such a long relationship with Beam that I got to redesign it twice, which is a unique experience as a creative. But we had an interesting relationship with Beam for a long time. We're more their innovation agency of record. So we got to kind of fill the pipeline with new products, and bring our branding and design sense into the innovation world for new liquids and flavors and occasions. And it was kind of a cool time, because if you can remember all the way back then, it was kind of the boom of Mad Men. So I just feel like, brown spirits in general just took a upward trajectory from there, and we haven't stopped, thankfully. So it was a great time to be a part of, a big conglomerate like Beam. It was before they were acquired by Suntory, and that was the first assignment that I can think of.
And Zach, I'm guessing there's some Maker's Market coming up. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, prior to that, when I was in Chicago, I worked on the Wertz beverage group account. So I got some, Stoli and some stuff like that. But then I think my first big bourbon project was also Jim Beam on the point of sale BTL side of work, and doing some displays for them. And then that just kind of led to eventually being on the Maker's Mark account. So.
Right on. And David alluded to a couple of other questions that I'll just jump to. And one of those was this idea of elevating. So taking an existing brand or creating a new brand, and what can you do from a design aspect to elevate the look and feel of that bottle or the label or the brand in general. Since you kind of alluded to that a little bit, David, you want to talk us through some of the things that you do as a designer to elevate, to make something look more premium?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a design perspective in this category, there's two tricks really, and that's, it's either less is more or more is more. So, that's kind of the starting point for most, premium assignments is you either let the liquid shine through with, very minimal, elegant graphics, or you just, bring that story to the foreground. And, you've got so much information in this category, place of origin, pedigree, distiller, batch numbers, barrel numbers, you go on and on and on. So, when you're thinking about exclusivity and, how expensive this stuff is, how luxurious it is, it's, oftentimes, older than, some of our interns at the shop. So it's like, you really need to bring that story to the foreground, and really the place to start is either by subtracting a lot of things or putting a lot of things on the label. You just don't want to be stuck in that middle ground.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that topic of elevating, Dak?
Building on what David said, I really think that materiality is a big piece of this. What you choose as far as what your substrates are, how you think about your closure, what you're going to use as far as if you're going to use any type of metallic type thing. So if there's a foil or anything like that, any type of varnishes that go on top of that, font choices, obviously what David said as far as like, I always think, in my mind, I think of subtraction more than I think of addition. I think when you think about global markets and you're talking about things like Russia and China, I think addition does make sense. But I think if you're staying domestic, I think subtraction makes sense for that. The idea of sort of streamlining what that is. The other thing you can also look at is how you handle your structure. So if you move away from your core structure and move into a different structure that's a little bit more elevated in some way, that's another way you can do that as well. But I think those are the main applications that I think of right off the bat.
Yeah, and that brings up another topic that I wanted to have people talk on, this idea of custom bottles and the design of the vessel itself. Because obviously it's easy for all of us to wrap our heads around what a label can do, but the intricacies of creating a bottle from scratch for a brand, has anyone done that and would like to discuss? Dak?
Actually, I'll grab it. Yeah, I'll tell you the thing that's really amazing. I'll say this about this process, at least at Rabbit Hole, is we were working on our gin package, and it had previously been in the same core structure as our whiskeys, and we were trying to rename it, and we were going to give it something a little bit different. And I remember Kaveh, our founder, I was in a meeting with him, and he asked me about it maybe a couple of days before, and then we were in a meeting, and he said, "So Dak, where are we with the gin?" And I think he was expecting maybe to see something, and I hadn't had a chance to do anything. And I said, well, I've got some ideas. And he said, okay, let's hear them. And I explained to him what I was thinking. And I'll never forget it. He was just like, okay, go do it. And that streamlined process was something that I was like really, it was a different animal for me. I was like, wow, okay, we're going to do this. So what we did was we were building off the idea of sort of Savile Row of London. And if you kind of think about the bespoke nature of the tailors there, and you think about the idea that we sort of finish our gin in barrels in sort of this bespoke fashion, we sort of built on that idea. And in doing so, if you think about like the idea of using tweed and the herringbone pattern that's part of that, what we did, and hopefully you can see this, we did a herringbone emboss all around the bottle, which came out wonderfully as we were doing this. And, you know, lots of times when you're dealing with glass, things as far as emboss and debosses can get washed out depending on how old the molds are and how much you're doing. The folks that we worked with did a fantastic job with this. I was really impressed at how they did this. You know, and then we were doing things also that, you know, we included things on the top. So we have, I don't know how well you can see this, but it actually says Rabbit Hole and it says Bespoke Gin on here as well. So you're looking at embossing, debossing. You're thinking about, at least to me, of the tactile sense that you're providing to someone when they hold the bottle. So there's something they can physically feel. That goes on to the label as well as you're doing that, as well as the cork and anything you're doing with the closure. You know, and I mean, and to build on that just briefly is that we also use sort of language to support this. So we have like fashion with the finest botanicals. We have suited for the discerning, all that kind of thing that builds into that as well to sort of help support the narrative of what that is. Of sort of that we're doing something specific and special by putting this gin into a whiskey barrel.
Dak, are all the Rabbit Hole bottles, are they all the same shape?
They are not. The gin is a completely different shape. We're just now launching a new product, which is a cast strength Founders Collection, and it's reminiscent of the bottle that we have for our core products, but it is a little bit more stout. And instead of having the sash that we have with our label, the sash is actually a glass emboss. Something else we also think about heavily is if you think about whiskey in general, it's usually a very masculine driven sort of product. You know, I know that, you know, if you kind of look at sort of the heritage brands, there are a lot of that's dominated by a Western 19th century aesthetic. And, you know, I think the folks that are here, I think you probably dealt with doing something a little bit more modern, which I think is awesome. And one of the things we really think about at Rabbit Hole is we think about our female consumer as well. So our core product, I should grab this as well. This is one of our core products. This bottle has a hourglass figure, and we did that on purpose so that it had sort of it wasn't overly masculine. We wanted to be able for someone to feel it, to hold it. We thought about what it meant when a bartender was grabbing it and using it, you know, at the bar as well. So.
Yeah. Well, I was asking, it seems kind of like the trend for a while was, you know, in a portfolio to always have different shapes of bottles until it got to the point where nothing really, they're all so different. And it seems like the trend now is kind of coming back to having, to your point, having like less, tightening it up a little bit, right? To at least some extent.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with that. I totally agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, the way we approach that is that we look at our gin as a separate sort of structure. We have a vodka product too, which is a separate structure, but our whiskeys are all part of the same family.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And I'd love to hear from Jay if you have any insight into your bottles, and have you done custom bottle design?
Right. So we did a custom design. It was not a custom mold. I have one here in front of me. You may have seen. This is what I'm enjoying tonight, actually, our New Riff Bottled in Bond rye whiskey. And thank you, David, for this lovely bottle. Was a labor of love from our team and LPK's. You have some too. Thank you, my friend. Drink up, right?
Absolutely.
Go buy another one. So yeah, how do we come to this? So the back of the bottle says it's a slogan, a new riff on an old tradition. And that means making a new riff, if you will, a guitar riff. I see several guitarists here in the room. I am one as well. You can't see it in my office here, but trust me, we rock and roll at New Riff. So anyway, a new riff on an old tradition. And for us, that meant maybe the package needs to embody. It can't just be a straight modern package, looks like a parallelogram or something like that, looks like a vodka bottle. It needs to encompass that tension between those two aspects, the new riff and yet also the old tradition. And so where we landed after a year and a half of work was it's a traditional whiskey shaped bottle. There's nothing terribly special about that. It is, for what it's worth, a Savor glass bottle that has been custom finished and things like that, but it wasn't a custom mold. It's got antique elements, including an embossment of bottled in bond, along with the addition of bottled without chill filtration. That's my favorite part of the bottle. I love pouring this and picking it up and feeling tactily. Haptics, we paid attention to haptics. What is the feel like? Oh, there's something written there. What is it? There are traditional elements, including we have it's not a tax stamp because you don't have to have a tax stamp anymore. It's a fake tax stamp, but upon it, I don't know if you can see this with my crazy camera here, but it has the season of distillation and the season of bottling. These are nods to the old time tradition that used to be required in bottled in bond. It's not anymore, but you used to have to put that on there. And to a bottled in bond whiskey, which is all we make, that is very much a nod to tradition. But then there's also certainly modern elements. You know, the name this is not old script. The logo is the logo, by the way, a shout out to BLDG in Covington, who designed this enduring logo, who people keep finding new things in this logo years later. I love it. And of course, this black, the sleek ombre, which privately I just wish we could see the total beautiful color of our dark unfiltered bourbon. Yeah. And instead we covered up half the bottle with this ombre. That said, despite being dark, it really does pop out on a shelf and look very distinctive. There's not really much like it on the market. So for us, the package was sort of trying to inhere the tension implicit in what we wanted to do in this slogan we have, being a new riff on an old tradition. So there are old elements existing in tension, a lovely tension with old elements at the same time.
Very cool. And how about you, Laura? I know that you've probably seen a lot of bottles come through Heaven Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one I'd like to talk about, I can't take the credit for designing because it was in place before I joined the team. We've had this bottle shape for a while, but I don't know if you can see that. Our Larceny bourbon is actually in the shape of a keyhole, and printed on the other side of the back label is actually a key that shines through. And the story behind that, and what I think makes a lot of, really, I'm sure all the people on the phone, we have unique products, we have unique stories to tell, but where Larceny comes from is actually the legend of Johnny Fitzgerald, who was a U.S. Treasury agent who held the keys to the Rick House. And as legend has it, he helped himself to a little bit of the product, and the best barrels in the warehouse were called Fitzgerald barrels. And so that is where the whole kind of brand story lies, around the lock and the key and the story of Johnny Fitzgerald. And part of the same family is actually our old Fitzgerald bottled in bond. Totally different bottle, but it does have some of the key elements, a little dark there, so you might not be able to see it, but still part of kind of that John E. Fitzgerald line. And the story behind that bottle, as well as in the 1950s, these different decanter shapes were very popular. And Zach, I don't know if that's where you were coming from too, of like brands having such, different, unique and collectible shapes, and now, things getting a little bit more simpler along the family lines. But my team was involved in kind of resurrecting an older label and modernizing it and repurposing it. And so we have a fall and a spring release of the Old Fitz every year. So
very cool.
Yeah.
And thank you for transitioning us to the next question, which will be, what are the challenges of designing for a heritage legacy brand? And what are the challenges of designing for a brand new brand? So your, brands have been around for, 100 years, decades at least, versus something that's brand new that just started up in 2020. What are the different challenges of designing for each of those? Does anybody want to start us off?
I guess I'll go. I can go. Sorry. Previous to working for Rabbit Hole, I worked for Brown Forman for many years. And that was really where I ran into what Jim's discussing here is the idea of working with heritage brands. One of the things you're always trying to figure out is how do you have something that touches on the past but is still relevant? Because you don't want to have something that's a dusty grandfather type product. And you're always thinking about how can you modernize that? So I think that, one of the things I think that helps with that a lot is thinking about font choices. I think font choices help a lot to sort of bring things forward. And I think that in doing so that you can also, as I said before, think about how you use materiality. And I think the way you use materiality and how you use embossing, debossing, different types of varnishes, things that weren't necessarily available to the heritage brands when they were probably at their, genesis, you can now, enhance in different ways. And, and other things that help with that also are color.
Yeah,
I was going to do that.
As well, just thinking about the challenges we've had over the years on, working on something like a Jim Beam Black or, we did Makers 46 too, which, you always want to pay homage to kind of what came before you. So, working in this industry, it's, you have to be a bit of a historian and, you don't really want to reinvent the past if it doesn't need to be reinvented. And, things like the Samuels family, did decisions that they made to build the brand to what it was, would be very irresponsible to walk away from. And then, it's such a saturated category and there's so many new players seemingly popping up overnight that, Jay hit on some themes that I think are very important just in terms of tension and contrast and really finding that thing that's unique about your distillery and trying to bring it, visually to the customer, whether it's, very literal or maybe more in their subconscious, but finding that grain, that nugget of individuality that each distillery has and really bringing it out to the foreground. You get to do that a little bit more with the new and modern brands, but with the heritage brands, you kind of have a large looming heritage of responsibility on your shoulders to, pay homage to those brands, but keep them, keep them modern and keep them relevant as Dak mentioned as well.
I also think too, it's spirit specific, right? So I think whiskey is time tested. You can bottle a 2-year, which some people do, but at least, bare minimum usually is 4-year, but you can bottle a gin and vodka pretty quick. It doesn't take as long. And so I think that's why gin and vodka look a little bit more timeless, or they're not as timeless as some of the whiskey brands, because this stuff takes a lot of time just to harness from the barrel to put it into a bottle. And things that are a little bit more flash in the pan are a little bit more trend chasers with that kind of stuff. So you see that a lot more in like the vodkas and the gins, because they have the flexibility to be able to make something quicker and they could pivot faster than you could pivot, Maker's Mark, Jim Beam, like any of this Buffalo Trace, like any of these things, like you want to do it one time and then update it like 50 years from now, or come out with a secondary release that celebrates that kind of stuff. You don't want to keep constantly changing the label and those kinds of things, because I think whiskey, you don't want to do that, but you can afford that in other spirits. And you kind of see that as well, especially like in design blogs and everything else. You see some cool new kick-ass vodka that's $56, that from a design perspective, probably to David's point, it's going to look like a lot more because they're screaming on shelf for you to pick them up because they're the newest kid on the block. And then, they might not be around for 3 years post that. So they kind of can afford those kinds of risks. But yeah, I don't know. I'm more apt to like timeless design than I am to like trend design.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Doe Anderson is the agency of record for Maker's Mark. So we've worked a lot of different partners, design shops, digital shops, packaging shops. But every once in a while you get someone that's like wants to redesign the whole bottle, the whole label and everything. And David, to your point, it's like, that's not the right approach. There's a reason it looks like this, and that's in the story. And we've done a lot of research for as to why people buy certain bourbons and what attracts them. And it comes down to they want a cool story to tell their friends on their back bar, and they want a bottle that looks cool on their shelf. So, you can't remove one of those things and not have the other there too. So it is a constant balancing act working with a heritage brand, but it does kind of force you to find those iconic elements and amplify them and keep that being the fresh thing that attracts new drinkers.
I think a buzzword here is authenticity.
Yeah.
Authenticity is something that everyone talks about. And I think that there's obviously there's a truth to that. And the thing that's really great about authenticity is authenticity isn't relegated to a time period. New brands can be authentic just as much as heritage brands. I think as long as you have a vision and a guidance of where you're headed and what you want your consumer to believe, and you convey that can happen. I mean, when I was working with Old Forester, there was a founder statement. It was sort of this authentic type of thing that was on every bottle, and I think that there's something about that that sort of resonates with the consumer. And Jay, I'm sure there's something on the language of your bottle, I'm not familiar with it that well, that sort of harkens to that. I know that with working with Cave, as far as the way we project things, we're about transparency, innovation, and authenticity. And that we kind of want to make sure that everybody knows that what we're doing and how we're doing it, and really creating one of a kind products.
Yeah, I feel like this category of maybe any category, if you're not authentic, the fanatics will find you. There's people aren't blogging about toothpaste out there, so it's hard to keep things away from consumers in this category. I think of kind of the great bullet witch hunt of many years ago of trying to figure out where that stuff was made, and people calling the number on the back of the bottle trying to figure out who was distilling bullet. And it was it's great, just brilliant marketing, brilliant design, brilliant storytelling, but at the end of the day, somebody will find you.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting here too, kind of on the lines of what David and Dak were talking about, just stepping back from heritage brands and the industry as a whole. I think it's one of the few industries that has always kept the thread of their heritage just in general, and respected the heritage, which I think makes some interesting stuff just throughout the decades, because they've kept that respect, and the industry has just always had that, and then innovating at the same time. So I think when you never lose sight of your heritage, and that meets current trends and current aesthetics, that's when some really cool stuff happens if you're designing honestly and with a story like David was talking about. That's when the really cool stuff can happen. And I think it's such a rich, kind of consistently well-designed industry, partly because of that holding on to that heritage throughout, which is really interesting.
And to Zach's point about iconic assets and just, making sure what your brand kind of stands for visually. I can just remember sitting in focus groups and, guys just want a story to tell their buddies about this new bottle that they found. And half the time they can't even remember the brand. It's always the one with the rocking chair on the front or the horse on the top. And, that was something as we were going through that process with Jay on New Riff. We kind of had that hanging in each meeting. It's like the one with and you got to fill in that blank, and you got to really get laser focused on your assets. So that's where that black ombre that Jay hates came from. It's the one with the black top. So it works more for consumers than it does for distillers. But you got to know how your consumers are going to find you and what they're going to.
Well, whatever it is, it's working.
Good.
So actually, David, that's a perfect transition into this question that we just got from the audience. Do you judge bottles by their covers when you're shopping for new spirits? So when you go into the liquor store, are you picking up and buying something based on the design only? Like you don't know a thing about it?
I'm a designer. I do that for everything. I judge everything by its cover. So yes.
Yeah, I'll window shop for a long time, but I'm not going to put it in the cart. because then once you're in the industry, you kind of know who maybe is making some other people's juices and contracts and all this other stuff, and you're like, no, this it looks cool and sexy, but the juice is 2 years old, and it has a cool fancy story about how it's aged and blah 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 blah, but it's a 2-year-old whiskey and it's just going to burn your throat to all hell, those kinds of things. I appreciate design for design's sake, but I also appreciate things that are kind of, like I said earlier, kind of like time tested, and that they're going to have a long road ahead of them. And again, it's completely spirit specific, and like things that I think whiskey's killer. Like where I'm super excited right now is tequila and mezcal, because they have a little bit more of this lawless wine label look going on to them. Whiskey can't play by those rules, but wine labels, there's not a lot of rules to a wine label. And I think a lot of things that are happening in the craft tequilas are starting to carry over into that language, and it's starting to get a lot more rural in look and nature. And I think that kind of stuff is super cool and inspiring to me, but I don't know a damn thing about, this mezcal from that mezcal. So I'm a little bit not as familiar as I am to like whiskey. So I go in kind of, okay, this looks good and this looks good, and then just kind of give it a whirl.
Yeah, I think it helps being a little bit further removed. I'm the same way. Like
for sure.
Like mezcal is like, I don't know anything about it, and this label looks awesome, or this is the one that Young Jerks just designed. I'm gonna buy that because of that reason. But like bourbon's too close to home. You know what I mean?
It's also a price point thing. Like if I'm not going to spend $50 for something that I don't know much about, but when you get into the beer and the wine, and to Austin's point earlier, things that you can turn over quickly, it's hard not to be enamored by a beautiful piece of art on a shelf.
I always try to deconstruct what somebody pulled off. I'm looking at like what's a new way to think about something, and figure out how did they get this embossing, how did they get this label texture, how did they do these different things. I mean Jay, how you did the ombre, I'm impressed with how that works. So I'm always looking at things as far as like how, what are new things that are out there, and figuring out how they were made.
And Zach, you and Dak both gave me a nice transition into one of the questions that I brought to the panel is, who are your favorite spirits designers, aside from yourselves, obviously, right now in the marketplace?
I'm always attracted.
Young Jerks.
Yeah. I mean, their mezcal they just did is phenomenal. The name escapes me right now, but the image is great. And I also like Kevin Cantrell and Chad Michael's studio. But those guys do things that are so far removed from my aesthetic and my style that I think that I'm naturally attracted to something that's just totally opposite and so detail oriented. And I can't even imagine how much time goes into those labels. But those are my go-to for inspiration.
Yeah, building on what Zach said, I actually had a chance to work with Chad a couple of years ago. And Chad is actually a product of Stranger and Stranger, which I think they do amazing things. Mm-hmm. If you've ever seen their portfolio. And I'll tell you, the other people I think about are some of my cohorts that I've worked with in the past. There's a guy named Sam Gardner. There's another guy named Johnny Cardenas. There's a woman named Tara Labanovich that I worked with. I thought all of them did amazing things.
Anybody else have any go-to inspiration, or just vibe because they did it?
Yeah, I'm always a component of like rooting for your buddies, and I know a lot of people in the spirits category, and that's the other thing too. Like walking around whiskey, I can text the person who designed it, or they were on the team that designed it and said good job. But a guy that I liked a lot is Mike Tabby he's in Austin, Texas, but he's ex Two Arms from Brooklyn. Him and his wife owned a spot, and Stranger and Stranger uses him a lot as kind of a hired gun. And so he posted it, so I can talk about it. Like, so he did all the Knob Creek rebrand. And I thought that was a really interesting one of how they kind of reframed it. And they went from the more is more to less is more and kind of stripped it down a little bit. That guy, he does beer and spirits and all kinds of stuff, but he's one of those kind of silent killers that I think that's a hired gun for a lot of big agencies, and just constantly just puts out just incredible work.
You know, another industry that is booming design wise is cannabis.
Oh
And
yeah.
and you know, there's a lot of people look for or poach from the spirit industry for the cannabis industry too, and that's where I get a lot of inspiration from that.
Yeah, cannabis is an interesting place to draw inspiration from because the regulation's even tighter in that market, and depending on where you're at and what state and municipality you're in. So
Yeah, well, it seems like they have, well, of course, they have a ton of money and they're throwing it at all like the best people. So you're seeing just tons of good work coming out from like everybody. It's really fun to watch.
for sure. We have a lot of questions from the audience about how all the disruptions of 2019 and 2020 have affected you from a design standpoint, and how you're transitioning in-store experience to online, things of that nature. Does anybody want to talk about that?
Well, from an agency perspective, we shifted early on. Almost all of our focus went from all these other outlets that we were working on with Maker's Mark to e-commerce and our social. And we're just churning out a ton of work, doing these crazy productions that were all remote or had like one person there, and we had to wait for the director to send us a video file, 10 minutes later, and then download it, going back and forth, remote editing. And that went on for months, but it ultimately landed us, I think Spirit Magazine ranked us number 6 in Spirit responses to COVID. So it paid off, but it was, I mean, like I said, it was a complete refocusing from this brand refresh we have going on, this new campaign development we have, that all went on pause and went straight into e-commerce. And I think we're seeing that we're still putting a lot of energy into that because it's still, well, of course, the pandemic's still going on, but also that was just kind of like an obvious thing. Like, yeah, why aren't we putting more into e-commerce and more into that element? So that was interesting.
Yeah, Jim, we made a complete sort of shift from being on premise and having a whole hospitality team to moving to what Zach said, to an e-commerce sort of model. We're also looking forward to being able to do the direct to consumer, which is upcoming. Hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be able to do that as well. But I do think that there is a big shakeup of sort of how that's functioned. I know that we've already have a pretty hearty Instagram following, but one of the things we've done to support that, though, is we actually ended up doing sort of these forums with our founder. So you kind of shift from sort of designing POS things to designing digital assets to sort of support that. So we have this thing called Kabe's Bourbon Bunker, where he kind of sits down in this room that he has with all of his bourbon, and he sort of has guests and he fields questions. So that's sort of like the main thing I feel that's happened for us.
I mean, I could talk from an agency perspective as well. I mean, being more on the kind of the brand and innovation side, that, if anything, this situation has reinforced the importance of brand, and that, it's a timeless kind of through thread, no matter what's happening. So it's been, it's been kind of been business as usual, but you're looking at different sources for inspiration. So, I feel much more siloed and alone, like probably most of us do, and I'm spending less time in a brick and mortar shop getting inspiration, and more time finding inspiration from my 4-year-old kids or anything that I can grasp onto. So it's an interesting time, and I think only history kind of has its eyes on us, and we'll be able to look back in 5 or 10 years and see how it's really affected the industry, the category, and the design and aesthetic that's gone along with it.
While we're on this topic, I just wanted to throw out to Jay. I know you guys transitioned from distilling to hand sanitizer. Do you want to talk just like briefly about that and what that looked like?
Hand sanitizer, yeah, or as we call it at New Riff, the best damn hand jam in the land. We made hand sanitizer. We, as we have discovered more and more about this virus, we find that fomites, that the surfaces, the surface transmission of it is not quite as bad as was thought in, say, March. or April. And so the need for that has slowed, and also the really big industrial producers of it finally got caught up. So we haven't had to make any for a while. We're rather sitting on a stock. Why don't you come grab some? It's only 20 bucks a gallon. But it was, we learned to make hand sanitizer at breakneck speed. We distill it ourselves in-house. We denature it. We had never made anything that high proof. We had to learn some new techniques. Our team, our production team, our distillers just outdid themselves in figuring out technically how to make a completely new class of alcoholic spirit. And put all that together, it was a tremendous effort. And we began giving it away to first responders in this greater Cincinnati, mostly greater Cincinnati area in April, and continue to do so now. We also sell it in the gift shop. There was a labeling component to that as well. There are various FDA required things that you have to have on the label, but of course we also wanted it to have something with our brand. We didn't just want a black and white label. We did not, I'm sorry, David and Austin, who we work with, have time to go to you guys to make a custom hand sanitizer label. We cranked something out, but it had an image of the building and our logo and things like that. And it was important certainly to get out there that we are doing this and that we are here with you. We wound up with, I think, a relatively attractive package, considering it's a gallon jug or a 55-gallon drum. A little bit like making a beer keg collar, for the 55-gallon drum, because it's just going to probably get beat up. But we transitioned in rapid fashion to making a bunch of hand sanitizer, and we'll make more if we need to.
That's great. Thanks for doing that, Jay. Let's take another.
Real quick, I relate completely to your experience, Jay. We did produce hand sanitizer in Kentucky and also at our locations in Canada and Texas as well. And nimbleness is one of Heaven Hill's core values, and I can definitely attest to the fact that we turned on a dime and just recognized the need, like you said, of the first responders to get that out. And my team in-house did design the label, but 3 different versions for the different locations. And I remember my boss texting me over the weekend, do y'all have that label yet? We're even struggling to get the actual labels to actually physically print on. So I think I had a hospital mask at that point because it was so early in COVID. I ran to Target, I ran to Walmart. I'm buying Avery template labels because we're cranking out this hand sanitizer at Evan Williams Bourbon Experience with no labels. So I think that's a memory I will have for a very long time of Heaven Hill jumping on the knee, just like many other distilleries such as yours, Jay.
Yeah, Jay and Laura, we did the same thing. I had to design something in a day. As far as whip a label out, here we go. And, we're making.
I'm texting my designer, do you have that yet? We really need it.
So kind of rolling off that whole idea, do you guys see design trends that are going to stick around based on the pandemic and civil unrest and all those kinds of things in the market? Do you see changes that aren't going to go away?
I think
it's going to be mostly in. Oh,
no,
Zach,
go ahead,
my bad, bro.
No,
I think for a brand to save face, it's going to be in advertising more than it's going to be in packaging. That's where the dollars are going. It's going to marketing and advertising to come out and say, hey, we stand for A, B, C, and D, and not E, F, G, those kinds of things. I think because that's where it starts, right? And I think that's where people are being able to kind of put their foot in the sand and say, hey, listen, this is who we are as a brand. And then eventually you would think would transactionally happen to go to someone going to the shelf and buying the bottle because they saw somewhere, whether it's a sponsored post or whatever the case may be, this brand stands for this. This bottle means this. I don't think the bottle is going to stand for much as the brand's going to stand for the bottle. At least I think that's been the case forever, and I don't think that mold's ever gonna really break. So I think it's gonna be ad marketing first, and then the payoff is when 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 the bottle's on your bar at your house.
I think people will have better e-com experiences and
Yeah.
a little more experience with social and maybe more cocktail deliveries. So some good things maybe come out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think radical transparency is going to be short term, and then, you know, if anything, this pandemic's been kind of a, you know, it's kind of like a great dumpster where like the things that don't matter anymore just get jettisoned into it. And you know, it's alcohol, guys. It's liquor. It's fun. It's supposed to be fun. So there's, you know, look, tone, feel. You know, the voice that your brand has can probably, maybe humor comes into the category a little more, or, you know, taking yourself maybe not as seriously as we did 5 years ago.
Well, it's like a pendulum, right? I mean, like when, you know, what was like in March, April, we're here where every ad was in unprecedented times. How do we do blah, blah, blah. And now it's starting to kind of sway back a little bit. So hope, you know, by the time this thing's over, I think we'll be in a much brighter, lighter, more humorous place, both in design and the way we talk about brands. But right now, I think everyone is right. It's like we want to know that these brands are with us, and we want to be transparent and we want to know what they stand for. Because if we're not into that, if we're not for that, then we're done with that brand, right? So I think that's what everyone is kind of honing in on, is what does our brand stand for? Anything? Okay, well, what is it? And that's where I think a lot of the ad marketing dollars, to Austin's point, goes.
Yeah, I echo what you guys are thinking. You know, as far as like, you know, being transparent, being authentic, finding out what the core of the brand is. I mean, I think that's something that is very relevant. You know, one of the things I also think about is sort of like the functionality of how we exist today. And, you know, honestly, I think that we're going to end up, just as designers, working more remotely. I know that one of the things that's crazy is like doing things like Zoom calls or Teams calls. Everybody shows up on time, which never happened, it seemed like, when we were all in an office. Like everybody's punctual, and if they're not, they give you a message saying, hey, I'm going to be a couple minutes late, and you know what's going on. So I think that that's something that's like, you know, really different. You know, I mean, I can see in the future, you know, sort of basically there being, you know, companies working with just virtual employees, and they are, you know, scattered throughout the country. I can see that very easily happening.
All right, I'm gonna pop in here with the final question for each of you, and that is, how did you each get into this industry of distillery branding?
We'll start with David.
So I've worked at LPK for 15 years, and that's a long time. It's the longest I've done anything in my life. And so we've, you know, had fortunate, you know, to be on the, you know, branding side of a lot of different brands. And so I don't know if I chose the industry or it chose me, but I got lucky. It's one of the best ones to work in. So.
Dak, how about you?
I was actually working at a small design firm here in Louisville. I just moved here from Louisville. I've been at that for about a year. And I wasn't very happy where I was. My wife said, you know, Brown-Forman has an opportunity. Why don't you think about that? And within 20 minutes of that phone call, I got an email from a recruiter asking me about the job at Brown-Forman. So I applied, and it's so crazy. I remember she wrote back to me, and she basically like scathed me, you know, telling me that, you know, I wasn't like the right person for the job and all this other stuff. And I was like, listen, all you got to do is just say I'm not the right candidate, and we're good. And then she forwarded it on, and then she calls me back about an hour later and says, hey, they want to meet with you. So I ended up meeting with the head of the design department. And then later that day, I met with the, the creative director. So when I met with the first fellow who was the head of the design department, he went to college in Virginia, and he was on the tennis team. Well, I went to college in Virginia, and I was on the tennis team. We were different colleges, but similarities there. And then when I met the creative director, his design mentor was Rob Lawton, and my design mentor was Rob Lawton, and I got hired that day.
Jay, how about you?
Well, I guess I've been working in the drinks industry in one corner of it or another, one tier of it or another from 1997. but started working at the Party Source in 2001, and that was formally my first job in spirits. I've been learning about it since I was 10 years old, and reading books and educating myself about all kinds of spirits, and that it was one of those hobbies that turned into a career at the Party Source, and to the point of really making the stuff and of helping to run and start a distillery like this. It was partly very much being at the right place at the right time, working for the right person at the right time. I worked at the one liquor store in America, in a great whiskey region in America, with a visionary, chance-taking, perceptive entrepreneur in Ken Lewis, the owner, the founder of the Party Source and of New Riff, and that wouldn't have happened probably anywhere else. It just bubbled up between the two of us, and the next thing we know, this dream is coming true, and here we are with rye whiskey 6 years later. So it was a hobby that turned into a serious profession.
Nice. Austin?
Yeah, I actually started in beer for Miller Coors in Chicago. And that's what I wanted to do was beer. And so I was doing a bunch of beer, tons of their brands, and then moved to Cincinnati and actually worked where David is at LPK, and I was hired for the Beam team. And the day I started, they said, "Psych, you're working for Anheuser-Busch. There's legalities for those kinds of reasons." So I did AB for 5 or 6 months, and then started my own studio and started doing stuff with Constellation Brands and Sazerac and this kind of this, that, and the other. And so that was kind of a more mature beer experience, because the craft was kind of going up in the beer, and the spirits and stuff like that was kind of tailing in behind some of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's how I started. And so now, we do both. We do spirits and we do beer. And I think it's a nice juxtaposition to be able to design on both sides of your mouth for that, because they're both completely different categories. Jim, you crush it. And people, I don't know if there's 2 people listening to this or 200, but shout out to Jim, because that guy's a design God, and he touches all of this stuff as well. So you should be talking more than we're talking. But yeah, no, that's how that started.
Well, thank you for that. Derek?
Similarly, I started with a bunch of beer brands. Then I came to Young and Laramore, some other beer brands. And I don't know if you could say that I am in the industry of spirits yet, like I said, but I would say that to do it, to be successful at it, distillery clients are some of the most savvy people, and you can tell with some of these people, they're savvy about design. Their industry is consistently well designed, and they know what they're talking about. So on a spirit label, on a bottle label, even if it's beer or spirits, you don't have a lot of space to work with. It's all in the details. So I think if you want to get into it, you just have to be a refined designer. You have to be able to, it's all in the details. It's, you can't pull a lot of tricks with it, and you just have to refine the finer skills of design, really. A lot of typography. That's what I would say.
Laura?
So my background is actually in account service on the ad agency side. I worked at Creative Alliance, which is now Scapecchio here in Louisville, for about 8 years, and had gotten my MBA at U of L, go Cards. And just, being in Louisville, you're always meeting people in the bourbon industry. It was something that I was ready for a change of just kind of, working a lot of quick service restaurants accounts, which I really enjoyed, but just looking for that next challenge in my career, and happened to be chatting with a friend about that who worked at Heaven Hill, and he said, they're looking to create an in-house design department. You should definitely apply for it. And I did. And it was just I've never looked back. Honestly, I've built the team kind of from the ground up. We've got an amazing team, and feel so lucky to be a part of a company with an 85-year history that is constantly innovating and growing and changing and new and exciting, different challenges every day. So.
Very nice. And Zach?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I worked on spirits a little bit in Chicago on the Wirtz Beverage account. And then I moved to Louisville, had my own studio for about 2 years. And at the end of that time, I got a call from Doe Anderson to do some freelance work on Beam and some BTL work for them. So I did that, and I kept taking more and more work on. I really enjoyed it, and I got to the point where I was at their offices more than I was at my own studio. So I, renegotiated, started there full time, and then eventually I became one of the creative directors on Maker's Mark. So it's been like a super crazy ride. It's something I didn't really plan on doing, but then I feel like once you're in this category, you love it and respect it so much. And there's so many similarities between the other designers and other people involved, like camaraderie. So it's really a really powerful thing. But I would echo what Derek mentioned. Like if you really want to get into this, I think getting into the details of it is super important, and also knowing exactly what these brands need, which is selling the product, right? So get to know what the distributors are looking for. Talk to regional brand managers. What are they wanting? What does the distributor in California need versus the brand manager in Chicago? It's all different, and you can customize certain elements to kind of fit those needs, because at the end of the day, it's about selling product. And that's the most important thing. If you want to get into the industry, know everybody involved so you can help them sell the product.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everybody, for talking us through your experiences in spirits design. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. I have no idea who you are or how many of you there are, but thank you. And thanks to AIGA for the Midwest Design Week. I think we're at time. So Vanessa, how do we wrap this up?
Thank you, Jim. Yes, thank you all for joining in this panel. This has been a great discussion. We have a lot of compliments in the chat. Everybody's really loving this. I'd also just like to say thank you to our sponsors, Millcraft, for sponsoring this event. And I think that wraps it up for this evening. So thank you all for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.